Hey everybody, welcome. Today I wanted to talk about Mercury, who will be turning direct on the 12th. And I think this gives us an interesting opportunity to look at what's gone on during the retrograde cycle, both in the world at large and also in a particular chart. So I hope you'll enjoy this video. Hi, I'm Ramdas Sinclair, and today we're going to be talking about the Mercury retrograde cycle, which will be ending on the 12th. Now, as those of you who have seen my channel before know, that I think there's really three phases to a retrograde cycle. It's a time when a planet appears to go over the same degrees in a sign three times. So in this case, Mercury it reached the 11th degree of Gemini first on June 2nd. And then he went forward until June 18th, where he retrograded at 20 degrees, like 30 minutes of Gemini. Then he went back to 11 degrees, and he'll arrive there on July 12th. And then the third pass is when he goes up to 20 degrees, 33 minutes again. He'll reach that point again at July 26th. So if we look at the three phases of the retrograde, I call it like the approach to the retrograde itself when he backs up, and then the final pass when he goes forward again. I think often by studying this time period, we get an understanding of all the information and all the effects that the retrograde is having. So usually what appears in the approach segment gets revisited, emphasized, refined in the retrograde phase. And then there's kind of a final analysis of this going forward. So let's look at the sign where Gemini is retrograding. And during this cycle, it just happens to be that he is retrograding in his own sign of Gemini. Now, Mercury is very strong when he's in his own sign, and this means we have experienced perhaps more potent effects of this retrograde than normal. But Gemini itself is about intellect, communication, and logic. The symbol in the Vedic astrology, however, is not a pair of twins like is represented in Western, but it's in fact a young man carrying a big club, and he's holding hands with a young woman who's carrying a stringed instrument. And so this is definitely a time in adolescence in our life. Gemini represents that energy where we're finding our who we are, and a lot of that is like who we're dating. So it has many associations there. But this basically means to me that Gemini indicates the people in our life who we want to protect and who bring delight and enjoyment to our life. So this could be siblings, friends, and colleagues, as well as people we want to date. And as I look at what's gone on during the retrograde cycle, there's been this, increased need, especially among young people, which is represented by Gemini, to socialize, to be out and about. And that only makes sense in a way because of where they are. But I think that this desire has been heightened even more because of Mercury's retrograde through this. So young people are feeling even more driven towards getting out and socializing, which has led to some of the ramifications that we're going with now. If we look a little deeper into the sign, we'll see that actually Mercury is in the lunar sign of Ardra. And this is a very powerful sign that is ruled by Rahu. And at the same time, Rahu is currently in Gemini. So this gives us kind of a double dose of Rahu. Now, Rahu is an energy which brings anxiety, turmoil, fear. It's very reckless with his speech. And in the higher plane, he brings us new challenges that we have to overcome, including facing the consequences of things we've done in the past. So Rahu is a demon. Now that is different in the Eastern idea of demons than we think of in the West. Basically, it's people, it's beings that have no concept of existence beyond this earthly plane. So they don't have any higher consciousness, no really compassion towards others, things like that. It's really that energy which we all have within us that focuses on I, me, and myself, okay, instead of we, others, and they, kind of an idea. So these people, don't really value things like honesty, morals, compassion, or caring for others. They're very self-centered. Ardra then also is ruled by Rudra, which is a form of Shiva, which is extremely destructive. It's like a wild, uncontrollable force filled, which brings destruction, chaos, and disorder. And so this is a very emotionally draining time, and our planet of intellect has been spending, triple time than he normally would in this energy. So during this whole combination of Rahu and Rudra impacting our intellect, we're experiencing what may be considered a separation from our reason and intellect. So thus we've seen not only physical eclipses during the retrograde, but also a psychological eclipse causing the public, especially here in the US, to ignore preventative measures, and it's led to an increased risk of infections. So as I was looking at this, I went to the Johns Hopkins site and pulled the numbers. And what I did, they could give you the number of cases per day. And so I did an average of the previous 7 days just to see if we could correlate a change in the infection rate with the movement of Mercury. And they did this because Mercury has all three gunas in it. And so when that is going on, Mercury can get easily out of balance. And since he rules the earth element, which is everything in solid form, he's related to our bodies. So Mercury is an indicator of health. And the strength of the Mercury in your chart, it leads us to, start to put together an idea of how your health profile will be in this life. So when Mercury is retrograde, it can be linked to an imbalance in health. And since we're facing a pandemic, I thought it might be kind of interesting. Anyway, that aside. So I looked at on June 2nd, the 7-day average of infection rate was about 113,000 people a day. And this is global, which makes sense because Mercury is retrograde for the whole planet, And then on June 18th, when he changed, that had increased to 183,000 people per day. And so that was about an increase of 25,000. The average moved 25,000 per day. That's in the preceding thing as he moved forward. Now, when we take the time to where he was as of July 9th, when the last data available, so it's still a few days to go till the retrograde cycle ends, the infection rate had increased from 138,000 people a day to 199,000 people a day. So that's a pretty dramatic increase. In fact, it's whereas in the pre-phase approaching to, it went up 25,000 cases a day on average. During the retrograde, it went up 61,000 cases a day. So this, I think, shows that this has been a time where, because of the influence of Rahu and Rudra in the sign of Gemini, where we all want to mash up together, that we have seen people their intellect, which is, what happens in a retrograde period, gets blocked. And so we've seen a dramatic spike in cases linked pretty much directly to people congregating and not using preventative measures. So I thought this was really interesting. The next thing I wanted to go into is to look at a specific case, because during this retrograde, Donald Trump actually happens to have his Mercury at 15 degrees of Gemini. So throughout this cycle, Mercury has retrograded over his natal Mercury three times. First, it went over on the 5th and 6th of June. Mercury was there. Then it passed on June 30th and July 1st. And then it will do its final pass on July 22nd. So I did a little research to figure out, well, what was going on with President Trump around the 5th and 6th of June and around June 30th, as well as when it stations direct retrograde and direct. And so I just thought to see if I could see something, since he has this exact configuration in his chart, we could see it. This is also the way you would look if you have planets wherever it's retrograding. You need to know, when it's going to pass over those sensitive degrees, and then you can see how it's manifesting in your life. So I went into his Twitter feed, which I had never been into before, and it's amazing how frequently he posts. So, but that's kind of a characteristic in a way of Mercury in Gemini. It's about communication. So when Mercury is there, and especially in Ardra, where it lives in his chart always, it's really kind of chaotic, and there's a lot of activity there. So, he's the first person, that's the first president that's ever communicated this way, and he does it very frequently. So you got to see some of the flavor, I'll say, of Mercury in Gemini in the nakshatra of Ardra. Those three things coming together he's a very good example of that. So around on June 1st, which is the day before it reached 11 degrees, where the retrograde cycle starts, is when they cleared the protesters from Lafayette Square, and he walked across to see the church that had been hurt by the protesters, and he held up the Bible. And so this is kind of what was going on there around that time. Subsequently, a lot of people, he was criticized in many areas for doing that, because it just seemed to didn't have a point. And that's also when he put up the big protective barrier around the White House. He put an additional fence, which was later removed. So it's kind of interesting that that was like a kind of a memorable event, but that's kind of where we are in the timeline. Now, around when June 5th and 6th, when it was going right over his Gemini, it's when he was really in a lot of conflict with the mayor of DC, because he was really actively pulling, wanting to get the military to take part in enforcing it. It was also at this time that here in Seattle, the CHOP or CHAZ, the occupied zone, was being formed, and he, was really speaking a lot about that. So he was really taking a very tough law and order stance. And he, in fact, tweeted on the 5th, just one tweet that says law and order. And so it was all about this, really bringing a very authoritarian kind of idea to how to handle the protests that were going on. Then around, it's interesting because you'll see on the chart that Mercury went just into the next nakshatra very briefly from June 14th to June 22nd. It was within just a few minutes, it went up and stationed direct and then came right back in. So Ardra is really the major flavor of this, the retrograde cycle. But it was during that time, the 14th to the 22nd, when he went into the next nakshatra, Punarvasu, which is ruled by Jupiter, a much different energy from Ardra, ruled by Rahu, that he gave a speech at West Point. This is when NASCAR banned the Confederate flag. It was also when the noose was found in the one driver's garage. And then finally, it kind of ended on the 20th, he had the rally in Tulsa, the big indoor rally that was not very well attended. So we see maybe a flavor of what's to come as Mercury moves out of Ardra. Some of those things may resurface. But then we come into June 29th, this is when Mercury, as you see on the graph, returned to his natal Mercury and transiting Mercury were both on the 29th degree. And the most significant I saw, this is when he reposted the clip from the Villages where there was a man saying white power, white power. From an astrological perspective, you see how his thinking must have been pretty disturbed to put these things out there, which are so unpopular in the culture. So what does all this mean to us? Basically, if you have planets in Gemini, you're more likely to feel the effects of this retrograde, especially if you have planets between 11 and 20 degrees of Gemini. you'll definitely feel the effects. And this is where you need to look it up and see exactly when the transiting Mercury is on your Mercury. So these influences are going to be felt differently in different areas of your life, depending on where the sign of Gemini sits in your chart, which house it sits in. For Aries ascendant, Gemini's in the third house, and you need to be attentive to how you speak with your friends, colleagues, things like that, because this can cause interruption. It can cause some conflict there. For Taurus rising, Gemini will be in the second house, and this could be the same kind of thing, harsh words with your family, conflict over things like that, or you may be overly concerned about protecting your family, and so you just need to keep communications clear. For Gemini ascendant, of course, Gemini is in the first house, and this could manifest as stress headaches. It could be physical conditions, anxiety, poor sleep, change in appetite, all those kind of things could be manifesting. For Cancer, Gemini will be in your 12th house, and you may need to isolate due to feelings of conflict, and that can be self-imposed or forced. Like, you have to be very careful how you behave, especially in public now. So if your ascendant is Leo, you may be deeply impacted by the current civil unrest. You may be really feeling it more than others because it's in your 11th house. If you're Virgo rising, the conflict you're feeling in Gemini may manifest in your workplace or with your boss specifically, as Gemini occupies the 10th house. If Libra is your ascendant, Gemini will be in your 9th house, and conflict, destruction, all that kind of stuff can center around issues with father, mother, mentors, fathers or teachers or mentors, leadership figures in your life. Also, spiritual leaders could be involved in that. If your ascendant is Scorpio, then Gemini's in your 8th house. So you need to be aware of scams and deals that seem to be too good. Do your research before you make any unusual purchases. If Sagittarius is your ascendant, then Gemini is in your 7th house. So you have to be sure to maintain the relationship between your spouse and also business partners. So close associates like that, conflicts can emerge. And so just really be careful and give it time, get it the retrograde pass, and look to heal it once the Mercury is direct again. If your ascendant is Capricorn, then Gemini is in the 6th house, and it can bring sudden conflict with your coworkers. Because 6th house is really people we know through work, that we work with, things like that. Also your day-to-day work. If your ascendant is Aquarius, then there can be conflict with children or romantic partners because he occupied Gemini will be in the 5th house. And finally, if your ascendant is Pisces, then there can be conflict with your mother and also maternal relatives as Gemini is in the 4th house. This can also just make you feel like you're just not happy. It can lead into depression, but it can be anxiety. You can especially be unhappy with your home and things like that. So I hope this has given you a little more insight. It'll be interesting for us all to watch the next phase of it and see what resolution we get as Mercury stations and then moves forward again. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you'll like and subscribe to this channel so we can stay in touch. Namaste.